Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're back at Trump National Golf Club for the 17th Annual Concours d'Elegance. Let's go see what's happening. I'm here with Bob Bondurant, and you're the Grand Marshal. How's it feel?
Oh, I love it. I'm enjoying it. It's a lot of fun, and Peter's taking good care of me. And this is just amazing. All these beautiful cars on display, and most all of them run. This one gets raced all the time. It's 57 Maserati 250. Yeah, a wonderful car. But the whole thing is just fantastic.
You're known for your racing career in the Formula One as well as the racing as a driver, sports cars. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us one of the stories, the highlights.
Oh, okay. Well, I raced over here for many years Corvettes, and then Shelby, he got the Cobra going. And the Cobra was, he told me, it's going to be a Corvette beater. And I said, oh, never will. Corvette's winning everything. We were at that time. But the first time it was out at Riverside Raceway. Billy Cross drove it the first time. And the handwriting was on the wall. It was quick. So I ended up driving for Carroll here, and then went to Europe in '64 and '65. And Dan Grilly and I co-drove together in the Cobra Daytona Coupe at Le Mans 24-hour race. We ran 197 miles an hour that time with only 275 horsepower. And Dan and I finished fourth overall, first GT class, and our mission was to beat Ferrari in the GT category. And then we really, Ford said, you want to beat Ferrari, and you want to beat him in the World Manufacturer Championship, and he's never been beaten. The second year, went back and won 7 of the 10 races, beat Mr. Ferrari, and I got summoned by Mr. Ferrari. I went down, and that was fantastic to actually really meet Mr. Ferrari. And we had a meeting about 45 minutes. He does not speak English, but he knows it well. And in the end, he went to show me the prototype Ferrari long-distance car, and the most important was the Formula One. And when he did that, it was like, over here is the prototipo, but over here is Formula One. That's the one that really counts. And I asked when he might decide when I'd drive for him. And they said, when I decide. I said, okay, do you know when that might be? When I decide. I said, okay. I thought, okay, I better stop talking. And I figured maybe 2 weeks, didn't hear from him in 2 weeks. And then 3 days later, they called me to come back to the Ferrari factory and be fitted for my Formula One car for the U.S. Grand Prix. That was really the highlight of all of that. It's incredible. And I continued racing Formula One, worked on the movie Grand Prix, trained James Gunner.
I was getting into that. You're world known for your training.
Yes, I love it. I seem to have a natural talent for it, and we're into our 41st year, and I love it. We trained James Garner, Yvonne Todd, Bedford, and Sabato for the movie Grand Prix. I was technical advisor on it.
Paul Newman.
And then my fourth and fifth students, but I didn't tell them till after the movie, was Paul Newman and Robert Whiting for winning. And I said, Paul, now that we're done with the movie, I said, you were my fourth student. He's, no, can't be. I said, yep, hey, you did well, didn't you? He said, yes, I did. I really learned how to race. And he went on and raced, and he won 4 SCCA national championships, and he raced at Daytona and did well, and he drove a lot, and he did really well. Wonderful person. He was really great.
Well, congratulations again for being named Grand Marshal for the 2009 17th Annual Concours d'Elegance.
I'm proud to be the Grand Marshal. Thank you very much.
We're here with Steve Tellick in Restoration Alley at the Concours d'Elegance. What all do you have here, Steve?
Well, we've got about 6 cars here. All of them have come out of the shop, some that are just about to start, one barn find, some that are midway through the process of restoration.
And you have a restoration shop. You're known for restoration. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we kind of have one criteria, and that's no boring cars. We just enjoy what we do. And we pretty much take a barn find and turn it into a show car.
Can you give us a closer-up look as how the process works to get it in Concours quality?
Sure, we'll take you through the whole process. What we have here is the beginning of the saga. This is how we find them occasionally. We call this a barn find in the trade. Dirty, been sitting forever, abandoned. Sometimes it's someone's idea of a project they're going to get to next summer that never really gelled. This particular car is a 1947 Cisitalia Nuvolori Spider. Very successful little company in post-war World War II Italy. And this one will be probably one of the next cars that we start to restore. It comes with the original Fiat 1100 engine. It made about 50 horsepower all up in the 1950s, but was a very good little race car in its day. When a restoration gets started, one of the first things that you do is completely disassemble the car. There's a common term in the restoration process called body-off restoration. In this particular case, the body and the chassis are separated from each other. What we have here is a rolling chassis from a 1938 Alfa Romeo, a 6C 2500. This will be completely disassembled, everything freshened up, repainted, rebuilt, all the bearings replaced, the engine completely redone and dynoed, and then this will all go back together as a rolling chassis again before the body is replaced on the car. So once we have the body and the chassis separated, we end up with two cars, the chassis, and then we end up with a body, as you see here. This body has been completely stripped out. We haven't quite removed the glass or the mechanisms for the doors yet, but they will eventually be removed. All the interior's been removed from it. And then from here, this body will be taken down to complete bare metal, which is another term that's used in the restoration industry. You hear chassis off restoration, you will also hear bare metal restoration. So here we have a Ferrari 250 Lusso. We have completely stripped out all of the components from the car, taken all the trim out, all the glass out. At this point in time, then it's time to remove all of the old paint. In one notable case, we had a car that had 15 different paint jobs on it. The lady that owned the car lived in Paris, and every spring she had a new color put on the car. So this car will be completely stripped down to the bare metal, and it will eventually end up looking like this, where all of the paint has been removed from virtually every surface. When we get to this point, then we start doing the body work to repair any problems that are with the body underneath. It's common for a regular body shop to use plastic filler to fill in little imperfections in the body. We don't use that. We do a process called metal finishing, where the surface of the metal is prepared to go direct to paint. You can see here that this is very rough. All the dents in the front here. This will all be pounded out by hand and turned into a very smooth paintable surface. One of the most unique skills in restoring a car like this is the metal finishing, and it's a dying art because no one is learning how to do it. The men that initially exposed me to this in my youth worked in the aircraft factories at World War II and were making aluminum skins for airplanes. When World War II was over, a lot of them went into the car business and started making custom bodies for cars and doing restoration work. Now, in the case of this, where this car has been damaged in the front, you will actually come in here with a hammer and what's called a dolly, and this will all get hammered out straight and brought back to a perfectly smooth condition. Once that's done, the entire body is going to be gone over. Then we go into the priming process, which we have here, which is again another dying art, because most of the paint process that's done like this isn't done. This is not like your Earl Scheib paint job or your Mako or your One Day. Every single surface of the car is going to be touched and worked on. In this particular case, even the inside of the car, even the engine bay of the car, all of this is going to be made new. Here we have the end result, the final product, the coup de grace, so to speak. This is a 1954 Pegaso, the very unique car built in Spain in the early 50s, right on through the early 1960s. They only built a total production of 88 cars. We have this one, which is about the 40th or 45th car built. We're not quite sure yet. But this car has been fully restored in our shop to Pebble Beach standards. Pebble Beach being literally the highest standard of restoration one can achieve on a car like this. This car was very unique in its day. This car particularly unique because the body was done in France by a company called Sauchek. The interior has been completely redone. All new leather, all new Wilton wool carpet. The instruments have all been rebuilt and all fully functional. That little switch panel in the center we refer to affectionately as the piano keys. Took over 150 hours to completely restore. The casting that supports the switches was completely deteriorated. The little cloisonne switch signs have been completely redone. We had to make most of those new from photographs. All of the switch mechanisms behind that were completely deteriorated, and they were old plastic and brass fittings. All of those had been made new. The car was presented at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance in 2008, and we were fortunate to receive one of the class awards and make a trip across the ramp. The Pegaso used a very avant-garde design for its engine. In the 50s, most engines were pushrod driven. This is a 4 overhead cam V8. It is 2.8 liters in displacement, which by American standards was quite small. A Chrysler Hemi was perhaps 340 cubic inches at the time, or 292. This uses 4 two-barrel carburetors. It's a very unique design in the way the ancillaries or the generator and the water pump and everything is placed within the car. The Pegasos were built for very exclusive clients, and you can see all the handwork that has gone into the finishing of just the engine bay. All of the panels that trim the engine bay have a process that is called hand engine turning, which gives it that very unique diamond kind of appearance to it. Has a massive radiator to cool the engine, horsepower of about 280 horsepower. Now we come to the other end of the spectrum in car restoration. The Pegaso being a car that you would display at Pebble Beach, there is also a vast area occupied by vintage racing cars. People often ask me what my favorite car is. It's an impossible question to answer, but this car behind me is probably very close to the top of the list. This is a 1959 Ferrari Grand Prix car, a 246 Dino. It was raced for 3 seasons, from 1958 when it was first developed and continued racing into the 1960s. This particular type of car was driven by the American world champion Phil Hill. It is a wonderful car to drive. I've had the great privilege of driving it at the Laguna Seca racetrack and a few other places, and I can tell you that it goes every bit as fast as it looks. This is the 1959 Ferrari Grand Prix car. Truly, this is a completely handmade car. Every single piece of this is what is referred to as a tool room unit. It is a V6 4 overhead cam engine, 3 two-barrel carburetors, producing a whopping 320 horsepower from 2.4 liters. Very, very powerful car with a tremendous amount of torque. Even the suspension components and the chassis are handmade. It is very unique. You will notice that the engine sits in the chassis at an angle. This allows the driver to sit below the drive shaft, which passes to the right side of the driver as opposed to underneath, as was done with earlier cars, allowing the driver to sit much lower and lowering the center of gravity considerably. It also has a transaxle as opposed to a conventional transmission, and that is driven from the extreme right side into the center through the gear set and then to the final drive. People often ask me what my favorite car is. It truly is an impossible question for me to answer. However, If I had to pick one, this might be very close to the top of the list. I'm still a little boy and I like to make noise with my toys.
I'm here with Peter Karnoff. He is the chairman of the Concours d'Elegance this year, as well as the Grand Marshal Bob. Boy, this Concours is really coming together. Can you tell us a bit about the weekend and how that started?
Absolutely. Let me turn my little radio down here. It's the weekend started with the gala on Friday night. We had a lot of fun, didn't we, Bob?
Oh, we had a great time.
Yeah, we had good silent auctions and good food and nice music, and that's where we started Friday evening. And then on Saturday, we had the road rally, and Bob led off the road rally with his old friend Vic Edelbrock, and they let that off in a 1958 Chevy supercharged with whatever Edelbrock puts into those Corvettes. So that was yesterday, and we had some great stops on the road rally. The last stop was at Ed and Susie Beal's house, and did we have too much tequila? I can't remember, but it was. They took good care of us. I think that's a good way of saying that. And so, and today is the third event, and frankly, I'm getting tired now after 3 days of this, but. We're very pleased. We have close to 200 cars here, and we spread them out a little bit more. We're really going for the quality of cars, and our mark this year is Maserati, and what better car to stand next to than the Birdcage?
I'm here with Suzanne Andre, and you're the class manager for the Ferraris. Can you tell us a bit about what's going on, how many cars, and the whole bit?
We've got about 13 cars here this year, a couple of duplications that were so popular last year they've been invited back. They were part of the Rodeo Drive event. And we've got a few Daytonas, 3 Daytonas, and unfortunately we don't have some of the 275s, but what we have in replace of that are these beautiful Lusos, these gorgeous Lusos, 2 in cobalt blue, which is very unusual. We've also got one of the Daytonas in white, which is also a very rare car. And we've got a 512 BB in black here that traveled all the way from Houston, Texas. And let's see, what else can I tell you about this group? These guys are a bunch of people who really love the brand, and they're passionate about their cars. And I would guess that each one of them has spent no less than $150,000 in restoration, some 3 times that amount. And they do an amazing job right down to the wheel wells and the emblems and everything else to make it be so that they can hopefully win a prize today in this show.
Concours quality.
Concours quality, 100 points, then every point counts.
Tell me a little bit about the history of your last name.
My last name is Andre, and my father-in-law, ex-father-in-law Gaston Andre, was 1960 New York Times Driver of the Year, raced professionally until the mid-'80s, and the Andre name has a long legacy up and down the East Coast when he used to race cars, when you could still pull your car to the racetrack behind your Saab station wagon or something. He's got a long history there, and just an amazing gentleman, and been fortunate enough to meet a lot of the drivers, Phil Hill and many others, and love being a part of this event and of the Ferrari marquee.
We're going to have a closer-up look of some of these cars. They are magnificent.
Indeed they are. Don't miss a detail, because that's where the beauty is.
I'm here with Kevin Oliver at the Palos Verdes Concours d'Elegance. Kevin, how long has it been since you've been involved with the concours?
This is actually our first year here at the Palos Verdes Concours. We're very happy to be here and get to participate.
You've been involved with other concours, though, haven't you? Absolutely.
All over the world for about the past 10 years, I've been showing Mr. Bowman's collection.
Can we have a closer-up look, and can you tell us about this special car here?
Absolutely. This is a 1959 Maserati Tipo 61, better known as a Birdcage. There are 16 of these built. About 2 exist with their original motor and transaxle. This is one of those 2. This car was campaigned in the U.S. by Gaston Andre and was very successful. It was the SCCA champion in 1960. There are only about 16 of these cars built. Like I said, the Birdcage is well known due to the small framework by this car. The chassis was very light. These cars came in weighing only at about 1,325 pounds and produced 250 horsepower, or sometimes in excess of that, and were very, very competitive.
This is the car I was telling you about, the Birdcage Maserati, where Gaston Andre, my former father-in-law in the Boston area, won championship in this car, and they honored him at the Lime Rock one year for this particular win in this particular car. And Kevin?
Yes.
Has brought it today. Aren't we lucky?
We're thrilled to have it here. If you want to take a little closer look at the car, these cars were very well done. Lightweight aluminum bodywork on a very lightweight mild steel chassis. They call this the Birdcage. These are known as the Birdcage because of the chassis with these cars. These cars used a very thin-walled, mild steel for the chassis. Lots of tiny little tubes put together, look like a birdcage, and that's where the name came from. The Tipo 60 ran with a 2.9-liter inline four, produced just about 250 horsepower. Top speed on this car back in the day, about 177 miles per hour.
I'm here with Scott Oshry. How did you get into cars, Scott?
Well, when I turned 16, I fell in love with cars, right when I got my driver's license, and I've been in love with cars ever since. I actually have a degree in automobile design, so cars are sort of my life.
What a field to be in. What a fun field.
Yeah.
I mean, it can last a lifetime.
Absolutely. That's another nice thing about this as a hobby. It's a hobby, doesn't matter how old you get, you can still love it and enjoy it.
What'd you bring to the Concours today?
Today I brought a 1960 250 GTE, and the GTE was the first production car that Ferrari ever made. And what I have is one of 3 pre-production cars of that series, and it's serial number 2169, and it was the first of 3, and it was also the Paris Car Show car, and the car that Ferrari used for most of their advertisements and PR, and the car they lent out to magazines to review the car. And it said that it was Enzo Ferrari's car for a while, and then it was shipped to Luigi Canetti Motors in New York and sold.
Wow. Can we have a closer-up look?
Of course you can.
Okay.
So the car was painted an atypical color. It's a version of Russo Rubino metallic, and it was a color that they formulated because the car was going to be the Paris Car Show car. So in the 60s, they wanted a color that was a little more vibrant. Now, it's not represented well here today with the fog out, but when it gets sunny, you'll be able to see that there's these great highlights where the car actually turns a very warm red gold. And then in the low lights, it turns a very dark chocolate maroon. The front of the car is a classic 250 aesthetic. It's pretty typical of most of the cars that were 250s in 1960. The car was styled very similar to the Pininfarina 250 coupe, and when Ferrari decided they want to make a production car, they felt it would be best to go with a 2+2 because they thought it would have a broader appeal. And so this, again, being the first production car that Ferrari made, they took the styling of the coupe and put back seats in it and rounded it off, and that's how we have this car. The interior of the car was designed to be luxurious because it was a grand touring car, but still be sporty. It was probably one of the first cars that had a high center console in between the tunnel and the dashboard. Also, an interesting concept they had for this car were rear bucket seats. So it's also probably one of the first cars ever to come out with rear bucket seats because, again, being a Ferrari, they wanted it to still maintain its sportiness. And another interesting stylistic feature inside is the high center tunnel, and the center tunnel running all the way through the back. Again, something that we see in modern day cars these days. The rear of the car has some very nice styling details as well, with the bone line that starts in the front from the front fenders and turns into very tasteful wings in the rear of the car. I think Ferrari's influence, or Pininfarina was influenced a little bit on what was going on with American styling in cars of the 60s, but in classic Pininfarina form, it's very toned down and very subtle. Also, the real taillights are interesting, whereby, again, sort of influenced by what was going on in American styling, whereby they were supposed to speak of jet engines or jets, but again, done in a very tasteful manner. So the engine on the car is a 250, and it's actually, even though this is a GTE, which means this car is a 250 GT, and E stands for the engine, this is actually has an F engine in it, not an E engine, because it was pre-production. The E engines weren't ready yet, so they put an F stamped engine in this car. Driving and owning the car is just a really special experience. Ferrari is probably the best marque in the world, if you ask me, when it comes to automobiles. It's one of the youngest, actually it is the youngest, most successful car company in history. And every car that Ferrari makes is just so special, particularly on the vintage side. It's one of those rare marques that everybody around the world follows the marque. Everybody around in the world knows where all the cars are. They're logged, they're categorized, and they're just special jewels to own. Another thing that makes them so interesting is how rare they are. Ferrari really made very limited production vehicles from their inception until the 60s when they came out with this car. The 250 they made 960 of. Before that, a large production run for Ferrari would only be maybe 190 cars or 200. Most of them would only be in the 100 or less. So rare to find and just real jewels to own.
I'm here with Shane McCoy. And how'd you get into cars, Shane?
I actually am showing today my dad's car. So my dad really started out collecting and restoring cars, and unfortunately he wasn't able to be here today because he's on the Colorado Grand with my brother. So I'm representing the family today.
So it's in the family.
Yes, absolutely. Has been for forever.
Oh, wow. What'd you bring today?
Today we brought a 1958 Pininfarina 250 GT Series Cabriolet.
Can you give us a closer up look? And then can you also tell us a little bit about what it's been through? I understand you brought some pictures.
Yes, it's been through quite a lot, and it's nice to see the car come back to life.
Completely restored.
Absolutely.
In Concours quality.
Absolutely. It scored 100 points at Pebble Beach last year. So last year, the car in 2008 debuted at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. It scored a perfect score, 100 points, which is pretty remarkable considering what the car's been through. The car was originally painted Andalusia gold when it was debuted in 1958. So this is pretty close to the original color, although not exact. It's pretty close to what it looked like when it first was released by Ferrari. It debuted in 1958 at the British Motor Show at Earl's Court. I think it was the 43rd annual, which is also pretty unique. I think it went back to the factory in '59 to have another distributor added, and went to its first owner in France. Subsequent owners, and then it was in San Diego, where it was damaged in a fire. And then unfortunately the garage that was damaged collapsed on it, so it was burnt and then wrecked. And this is its rebirth. It's pretty spectacular, thanks to Wayne Obrey and Wisconsin Motion Products. So my dad, Peter McCoy, has been restoring cars for several years. We started out with a Model A when I was just a kid. I remember riding in the rumble seat, so it's fun to evolve and see a car like this that was really pretty much destroyed. To have him take the time and the effort and work with Wayne Obrey in Wisconsin to bring it back to this perfect condition, the way it was meant to be. Well, Betty, thanks for taking a look at the car today. In 2002, the fires in San Diego took this house and this garage, and this is where the car was found, in this condition. And this is as it was being transported. They were able to salvage the body and much of the key parts. The car is more than 80% original. And this is what the car is today. Beautifully restored, perfect condition, a pleasure to drive and to look at, I think.
We're here with Linda and Bill Feldhorn. How'd you folks get into cars?
Well, we've been in cars probably since I was I've been in cars since I was 13. And Linda at about the same. In fact, she was a photographer on the Can-Am circuit back in the early 60s. So basically we've been car people most of our lives.
Is that where you folks met?
No, but it was one of our first dates.
Oh, wow.
On the racetrack.
Whoa.
And then when I found out she really did know Sterling Moss and was friends, I thought, this lady's the real deal.
Well, What'd you bring to the Concours today?
We brought this unusual color white Daytona, Ferrari Daytona 365 GTB4.
How'd you happen to pick this car to buy?
You know, I'd wanted a Daytona for years and years and years, and I saw this car. Actually, I saw it at an auction, and it was just a striking car, and so many cars are red, black, yellow, tan, and I saw this white car, and I said, this is it.
Looks like you agree with this, Linda.
Absolutely. It's such an unusual color that you see in like a racy design car that it's incredibly unique.
Can we have a closer up look?
Sure, absolutely. These cars, the early cars, had a plastic enclosure over the headlights. This is a later car, and it's a U.S. car. They couldn't get the European models approved with a plastic enclosure, so they went to the metal front and the drop-in headlights. And there's some subtle differences between the European and the U.S. cars. The space between the bumper and the car, the bumpers are out a little further on the U.S. car. The side marker lights towards the rear of the car. The side marker lights designate a U.S. car. The tail light lenses, both the tail and the brake lights are red. Again, that's a U.S. designated car. If you look at some of the cars around us, the tail lights are red and amber. So those are some of the subtle differences. Again, the distance of the bumper, because we were a little more safety inclined than they are in Italy. So the bumper protrudes a little more on the U.S. cars. The car is equipped with Pironi wheels, which was actually an option on the car as opposed to a semi-full steel wheel. The design of the car, it's a Pininfarina design, and it's just, in its day, was just a spectacular car. And of course, the name Daytona wasn't an official name till later on. It was truly just designated as a 365 GTB4, and then after winning Daytona, it just picked up the name Daytona. The interior has very, very comfortable seating. Driving the car on the highway is very comfortable. And if you can imagine the design of this car back in 1973, or all these period Ferraris, how advanced the design was and where some of our contemporary cars even today still come from. It's a heavy car. In fact, it's a beast. The car comes into its own after about 20 or 30 miles an hour, but it's heavy to steer and it's heavy clutched. It's not a car that you want to take to Ralph's and get a loaf of bread. This is the beast engine that I mentioned. It's a 12-cylinder 4-cam, and the car will do about 186 miles an hour. And so, as I said, it's a heavy car, and it settles down, and it is at its best at higher road speed. It's not a car that's really designed for tight, quick corners, but it's a wonderful car in big, sweeping turns.
I'm here with Bob Cuevas. How'd you get into cars, Bob?
Oh, gee, it's been a sickness for probably 30 years.
Did your dad introduce you to him?
No, not really. It was, I took an old beat-up car and spray painted it myself, and that's kind of where it started.
Oh, wow. What'd you bring to the Concours today?
Today I brought a 365 GT 2+2 Ferrari, a 12-cylinder front-engine Ferrari.
So can we have a closer up look?
Sure, let's do it.
All right.
This is a 365 GT 2+2. Very famous for being a front-engine 12-cylinder Ferrari made in 68, 69, and 1970. The car had a tremendous amount of power for its day. They're a very smooth-running car and very powerful and a great road car. The 365 GT 2+2 has a very sleek, long nose. As I said before, it's a road car, and when you take a look at the front of this car, you'll see the turn signals in the bumper. There are amber, which designates that it's a European car. Well, this 365 is probably the best road car that I've ever driven. It's very fast, it's very smooth, and it's a very, very heavy car. The 12-cylinder gives it a tremendous amount of power, and more of a luxury car back in that day. Being a 2+2, having 2 seats in the back and 2 in the front, less desirable back in the early days, becoming much more desirable today. The color of the car is rather unique. It's a 2001 Lexus 400 color car. It was done in 2001. The entire car has been redone 2 or 3 times. Different owners wanted different things done to the cars, but it was always done perfectly to spec. You'll see that every single thing on this car is done the way it was supposed to be done the day it came out of the factory, with the exception of the color. The color is much more of a deeper cobalt blue than the original color Ferrari came out with in the 70s. The interior, of course, is the Connolly hides, which you can't obtain anymore. Connolly's out of business. This car, again, was done in 2001. Every single detail of the car is done to spec. Probably the most impressive thing to me about the interior of the car, besides the looks, is the smell. You open the doors and it's just a distinctive Ferrari Connolly leather smell. When the car was redone back in 2001, the car was done to U.S. specs, but what we did is put the European taillights on, which is very distinctive from the American taillights.
I'm here with Michael Adams. And what'd you bring to the Concours today?
I brought this 275 GTB.
Can we have a closer up look?
Sure. Okay, this car is complete 100% restoration. It's got about 40 miles on it since then. As you can see, the interior is 100% redone. It speaks for itself. I'll show you the engine. The engine, everything in here has been completely restored, even including the battery. This is an original battery. Everything's original as it was in 1966 when the car was built. And you can see it's just like never been driven. But I drive it. The wheels are completely original, and this is the proper way for these cars is to have these wheels. You can have the Baroni, but this is better. Everything completely redone inside out, and you can see all the tools, all the books, all the restoration papers, everything. That's pretty much it. I better go now. The judges are here. It's their turn.
I'm here with Rich Heinrich. And what'd you bring to the Concours today?
We brought a Maserati 6CM 1937 Voiturette race car. Voiturette was a 1.5 liter series, a small series of monoposto race cars. This car belongs to the Scottsdale Automotive Museum, lives in Scottsdale. It is no longer raced, however we do drive it fairly regularly. It's driven on the street because it needs exercise and it's fun.
Can you give us a closer up look?
Absolutely. This is a 6-cylinder, 1.5 liter supercharged engine. Maserati started building 6-cylinder motors in 1934, and this is one of their very early 6-cylinder motors. It was a pretty successful race car in its day. We restored this car last summer or last spring at the Scottsdale Automotive Museum. This is part of the museum's permanent collection. It was a very nice car when we started the restoration. It was not difficult to restore, but we cleaned things up and renewed some things, did a few little minor mechanical things that were needed. Car runs, drives. It's a beautiful car to drive. Although, as I said, we do not race it. We just take it out for fun now, and we bring it to shows. As you can see by the exhaust pipe, it can be dangerous to get in and out from this side. The exhaust tends to get hot even with the cover on it, but it is also a car that we drive with 2 hands. It's you've got 2 hands on the wheel unless you're shifting, and really when you're racing you're not doing a lot of shifting. When we're driving it, we're not doing a lot of shifting. This car was raced quite a bit in 1937 by Giovanni Rocco. He was the first owner. He owned it through 37 and raced it in about 9 or 10 races. several first place wins, several third places. He did the fastest lap in the 1937 Targa Florio in this car. The next year he sold this car and became a factory driver for the Maserati factory. They were impressed by his driving in this car. The car eventually found its way to England and was in England for 1940 through 1980s, and came to this country in the late 80s and has been here ever since. It was raced extensively in vintage racing through the 90s, but since we've had it, it's been a display piece and a driver for us. This is a monoposto Voiturette class formula car. Monoposto means it was built for one person, single post. Not a lot of room in it. It's pretty sparse. The controls are actually quite easy to operate, except for that shifter that kind of jams your left leg. But really a pretty comfortable car to be in. This car was raced quite a bit through 1937 by Giovanni Rocco. It had several first place wins, several third place placements. It had the record for the fastest lap at the Targa Florio in 1937. As you can see, it's really built for somebody a little bit shorter than I am, but it really has enough room for me to drive it. It's not uncomfortable for me to drive, although I do get some wind. Really a beautiful car to drive.
I'm here with Frank Luca. And how'd you get involved with cars?
Well, Betty, I've had an affection for Italian cars for at least the last 35 years or so, starting out as a teenager, and have followed them ever since. Mostly Italian, as I said, Alfa Romeos, Lancias, Fiats, etc. This car is a 1978 Lamborghini.
Well, can we have a closer-up look?
Certainly. All right, so this is a Lamborghini Silhouette. The factory only produced 52 during the late 70s. This is number 40076. It was the 38th example in the production run, and it was based on the earlier Urraco platform. Lamborghini had Bertoni redesigned the body to accommodate a two-seat arrangement with a removable Targa roof. So this is the removable roof panel, similar to the Ferrari Dino Spider as well as the 308. It removes and is placed behind the two seats for traveling with the roof removed. This is the original color. This is the original red, Lamborghini red. As part of the design study, Bertoni used the magnesium wheels of the Bravo show car. So these are 15-inch rims, and he widened the track of the car to accommodate the tire technology of the time, which was the introduction of the Pirelli P7. The interior is a two-seat arrangement with room in the back to accommodate the removable roof panel. For the Silhouette, they did completely redesign the dashboard to provide the gauges in a more compact arrangement. It's a 5-speed transmission with a gated shifter, of course, in a traditional Italian sense. The dashboard covered with the elephant skin or mouse fur that was correct in that period to reduce glare from through the windshield. This is the 3-liter double overhead cam V8 configuration that Lamborghini used. It has 4 dual throat downdraft Weber carburetors. It is chain-driven cam drive, unlike the earlier Urraco that was belt-driven. When Lamborghini went to the 3-liter layout, they switched from belts to chain-driven cams. It is placed, mid-engine layout with a 5-speed transmission. Again, this car was originally purchased by Luigi Chinetti Jr., Coco Chinetti, and he owned the car through the late 70s. The car also appeared in an article in the 1979 edition, January issue of Car and Driver magazine, in an article written by Pat Bedard. Afterward, the car was also shown at the New York Auto Expo in April of 1979 at the New York Coliseum, of which was the first time I actually got to see this car in real life, and immediately fell in love with it. And it's been a car that I've admired ever since. After Chinetti sold it, it ended up in Ron Miller's collection in Norman, Oklahoma, when he built the Lamborghini Museum. Mr. Miller had acquired numerous examples of all the production Lamborghini models, and this particular Silhouette was in his museum until his passing, of which then the collection was dissolved and made available for sale.
I'm here with Ron Spindler. And what did you bring to the Concours today?
Today we brought two Bizzarrinis, and the green Bizzarrini that you see behind us is a Bizzarrini Manta. It was originally created as a Bizzarrini 538, and the 538 was a race car that actually raced at Le Mans. And after it did pretty well, but it didn't finish, there was a different rule change, which then kind of ruled it out. They needed to produce 50 cars, and they did not have the money to do it. Consequently, the car raced in a few local races and did pretty well. And then in 1968, a designer named Giorgetto Giugiaro, can't say that 3 times fast, was opening up his own shop. He had previously worked for Ghia. He did the Maserati Ghibli for Ghia. He had previously worked for Bertone, did the Mangusta, and several other beautiful, beautiful cars. He also originally designed the 5300 Strada Bizzarrini, which is the red car we'll talk about. And after that, he said, I'm on my own now. So he went to Bizzarrini and said, I need a chassis to do my very first concept car. Bizzarrini gave him the Le Mans chassis, and they built the green car in about 45 days, as I understand. And it opened at the Turin car show, auto show, in 1969.
Wow. Can we have a closer up look?
Let's take a look. The Manta was designed by Giugiaro, and he pretty well patterned the car after the Manta Ray. As a matter of fact, you can see the symbol on the front deck area of the Manta. It's called the Bizzarrini Manta because it's on the Bizzarrini chassis. And the front end of the car looks remarkably like the gills of the Manta Ray from the underneath side. And as we move around the car, in the engine compartment, there are also gills like appear on top of the Manta. One of the interesting things about the design of this car is the window glass in the front door. It appears as though it should crack when you open and close the door, but in reality, it just moves in and out of the car. And in its life, this car has had a split front window to make it a little bit easier, but when the car was restored, it was put back to exactly the original. The interior of the car, some called almost a Batmobile look because of the Batmobile type steering wheel with the orange trim on it, and it has a 5-speed Z0, I believe, transmission. It was a prototype for the ZF transmissions. And since the race car was so wide, it has room for 3 seats in the car. Driver sits center, and of course the niece and the wife sit on either side of you. The orange accent on the upholstery and on the car was a startling piece of artwork by Giugiaro, and he wasn't particularly fond of it, but everybody on his staff convinced him that the orange highlights on a bright colored green car would certainly attract attention, and I have to attest that it really does. Now the engine is a 327 Corvette with a Bizzarrini designed cross manifold for 4 two-throat Weber carburetors. Develops well over 400 horsepower and did a very good job with the racing people. It's a mid-engine car, so the engine sits directly behind your seat. Even with that, the front end of the car is a little bit light. It has a tendency to float a little bit, this particular car. In the design of the car, you can see quite a few other automobiles, most of which Giugiaro has designed. The back end looks a little bit like a Mangusta, a little bit like the Espada, all of which he had a hand in that design. The gills in the back are for ventilation for the engine, and they do resemble the gills on the top wings of the manta ray itself. What we're standing in front of right now is, first of all, the Palos Verdes Concours, great Concours, is a 1967 Bizzarrini Strada 5300. The 5300 comes from the engine size, which is a 5300cc Corvette engine, commonly known as the 327 Corvette. The faster cars came with a 4 carburetor intake manifold, which Bizzarrini designed and built for these cars. The cars are just spectacularly beautiful. I mean, I was trying to think of how I came on the car. I went to a car show in Santa Barbara, I think, and I saw this gorgeous Ferrari. It turned out that it was not a Ferrari after all. It was a Bizzarrini Strada. And I learned about the car a little bit, and about 5 years later, I was able to buy this one, and we restored it and took it to Pebble Beach, did very well, first in class up there. And the restoration that you're looking at here is 11 years old. It's held up very, very well. The automobile has been entirely refurbished, and it is one of the most spectacular automobiles to drive that I've ever driven. The engine sits well back in the car. It was deemed as the very first front-engined, mid-engined car. The weight distribution is within 1% of 50-50 front to back, left and right. And that's either with fuel or without fuel. Taking a look at the interior of the car, you'll see it's a very small 2-passenger car. It is one of the more difficult cars I've ever had to get in and out of. But once in the car, you become a part of the car. You're pretty well centered in the car. It's very, very easy to drive, very controllable, very roadable, and very comfortable too. We've taken 500-mile trips in Bizzarrini and come out just fine. As far as the fun part of the car, it's the engine. It's a 327 Corvette, and the Corvette engine was the best horsepower per weight ratio of any of the American engines, and very, very reliable. To this, a Bizzarrini designed 4-carburetor intake manifold was placed, which puts the car well over a 400 horsepower level. Like many of the new supercars, this car will do just about anything you want it to do. Now, I don't know if everybody knows that Bizzarrini was a top-flight engineer who went to work for Ferrari and made the Ferrari 250 GT into the spectacular car that it is today. In the early 60s, 61, 62, several people from Ferrari left, including the Bizzarrini and Revoltas and many, many of the very, very good people that Ferrari had. They created a company called ISO Revolta, and the club we have here is the ISO Bizzarrini Club. Combination of everything. The reason Bizzarrini went on his own is he wanted to race cars and have a good race car to prove up the quality. And the ISO Revolta people were more involved with creating a family car into production. So they had a friendly parting of the ways, and Bizzarrini went on to build about 100 of these cars.
I'm here with racing legend Vic Edelbrock. Boy, what a concours this is today.
Fantastic. It really is. You go up in the balcony up there in the main building and look down at the cars and the ocean beyond it, and it's just beautiful, beautiful. And the people who put this on have just done a tremendous job, and we're very glad to be here and be a part of it.
Well, it's great to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you tell us one of your stories about your racing?
There kind of a lot of stories of racing. I vintage car race now, and I have a 68 or 69 Boss 302 Mustang that was made special by Ford. George Fulmer drove it, and it's great to have something that he had driven, and his partner was Parnelli Jones, my neighbor up on the hill. I think the most interesting story is why I didn't race any more than I did, and that goes back to when I was 16, 17. I had my car, and my dad told me, "You're not going to go racing with it. You're not going to go drag race and stuff like that." Except I did it on the street when he wasn't looking. But so one day I said, "I'm going to the drag strip on a Sunday," and he says, "Well, son, do not race the car." Okay? I said, "Okay." So I got back, and he was up in the den watching Parnelli Jones race jalopies in those days. And he looked at me with a big grin on his face, and he says, well, how fast did you go? And I figured, well, heck, it's all right. I said 83 miles an hour. And he says, "Give me your keys." And my car sat for 30 days, and I never got to drive it. So I figured that when he'd do that, I'd better listen to him and behave. So I really kind of started racing a little bit with boats and things like that. And then in vintage cars racing, that started in '87, and I really enjoy that, and I'm glad I paid attention to what he was telling me, so that we are here where we are today and enjoying it very much.
How'd you get into the business? Can you tell the viewers a little bit about that?
Well, my father was in the business, and any normal son that wouldn't follow him around like a dog in heat or something like that would be crazy, and that's just the way it started, and I was around it ever since I was high enough to know better. And I used to spend my vacations working in his little shop and trying to get in the way and do whatever things that I could, because I enjoyed it very much. I still do, and I'm very glad I did that.
Thank you for joining us here at the 17th Annual Concours d'Elegance. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.